So today in our passage, we find ourselves at the doors of hospitality, the doors of inclusion. Today we will see that in our passages, chapter 10 to 12 of Acts, that we, Gentiles, that is, all of us who are not born into a Jewish family, that we enter the Bible in these chapters. These are pivotal hinge chapters for us to enter the story. Willie James Jennings, who's one of the primary commentators that I've been kind of using as I've been studying and reading on Acts and about Acts, he says it this way. We matter to God, that's the Gentiles and the Hebrews, we matter to God far more than we matter to each other. Luke's narrative from this point forward will strain under the weight of the obsessive love of God. This chapter is the pivot, the turn that makes intelligible everything before it and after it. What Willie is hinting at here is that it is at this chapter, chapter 10, that we Gentiles appear. Not just talked about in roundabout ways by the Jewish authors and prophets and priests, not just insinuated about, like for the Jewish people, love the alien amongst you, take care of the foreigners that come to you, all those good things, not just talked in a roundabout way. It is here the Gentiles, who might be the audience to the view of God's people, are now invited to step onto the stage. It is a pivotal moment that makes sense of everything the Bible says before this point. God's love is obsessive, reckless for all people. We read, at Caesarea there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion that was known as a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Here's the thing about God. Sometimes sometimes I have been a victim of thinking, or not fully thinking through who God is. I have been part of a few short-term missions trips in my life, and one of the things I have learned, sometimes late in life, if I can confess that, is that God is at work in all people in the world. That I actually don't bring him in a certain box and open it and go, here's God. That God is actually at work wherever I'm going. He's not absent, he's there. Even when he's not fully known maybe as Jesus, God's at work. His presence is at work. God is with and within the people around the world. Now, we have a joy of revealing his full revelation and work in and through Jesus, but God is not absent. And we see this in our passage. God not only has always heard Cornelius' prayers, he knows him. He knows him at the most intimate level. He knows his name. Let's keep reading. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. The angel answered, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon who's called Peter. He's staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. Now 30 miles away north of Caesarea, the Joppa, is where we find Simon called Peter. We find Peter there, disciple of Jesus, leader of the early church, a man who has walked, listened to, spoke, and learned from Jesus himself, a man that walked on water for a little bit. We read, about noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. Whatever that means, right? He saw heaven open and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners, ends of the earth, four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, get up, Peter, kill and eat. Cornelius and Peter, in our chapter, receive sacred visions. One to a man who's part of a powerful empire, represents the empire. He's strong, he's a master, he's a ruler. and one who is born into chosen people lineage, God's chosen, and particularly one who has lived and known Jesus. Two worlds apart, two very, very different people, through prayer, receive sacred visions. Visions that would expose God's immeasurable love and desire for all people. All of this we must understand as we are given report of Peter's sacred vision. Everything he's done his whole life, his whole worldview, his religious view, everything is blowing up for him. This isn't just a small task. This isn't just like, oh, okay, I'll just have this food now. Okay. This isn't like, I'll just eat the salad for people. It'll be okay. Peter's identity here, to the core, is being rocked. He's being asked to do something that doesn't make any sense. Peter is horrified. Get up, Peter. Kill and eat. Surely not. Some translations say, by no means. God, what are you talking about? Certainly not. I could not do this. Imagine saying that in a vision, like you're seeing this. It's hard to put it all in words, but this is how much it's rocking Peter that he's questioning it. Like, what? Is this a test? Of course not. Now, it may all seem simplistic to us some 2,000 years later, but we must put ourselves in the shoes of a Jewish fisherman, feeling his way, moving his way to a revolutionary understanding. Willie James Jennings reminds us that most cultures and time would see the animals was to see peoples. To touch and eat an animal was not a thoughtless act. For many peoples, their elders would have to seek permission from the animals to eat them in due season. And with the eating, something would have to be returned to the earth to balance what was taken and who was taken. To see animals was to see people. You see, this matters because Peter is not actually being asked in this moment to possess this food. He's not being asked to control this food. He's not asked to dominate this food. As much as he's being asked to enter in an act of intimacy and hospitality, Peter's becoming, through eating, a part of something that he never imagined he would be part of, an international new family. In the moment of radical hospitality, God is inviting Peter into something very new. A meal of animals descended from heaven, and the creator of the world granted to Peter permission to eat. In doing so, God placed Peter in the midst of the world and said to him, join in, join them. An open table, an invitation to partake in a meal that tells a lot about us, our likes, our dislikes, who's invited, who's not. It speaks volumes about who we are and what we believe. Hospitality is the movement of accepting God's invitation to participate in the healing of our world. How do you change the world? How do you turn it the right side up? How do you end wars? How do you end conflicts? How do you bridge divides between neighbors and friends and cousins and enemies? How do you reconcile? How do you make things right that were so wrong? The way of Jesus teaches us that it will be done in intimate spaces of a new family. God works in and from tight spaces, intimate settings of a family and hospitality to change wide open spaces of peoples and nations. And friends, it starts with a meal. Peter and Cornelius are now part of a movement from separate to intimate. Peter hears Cornelius' story and vision, and then he speaks. And Cornelius' family and friends are all gathered, and they're all listening. And Peter, who has seen Jesus now, only now, he's lived with Jesus, but only now understands God's desire and vision for the whole world. The door of hospitality opens through a family meal. To a gift of languages of intimacy, God's desire for the world continues to be revealed. Those who were outside find themselves inside. The Gentiles step into the story of God. We are rooted in this story because of two sacred visions, which included humility and a meal. The good news about crucified Jesus is shared through sacred visions of hope, of offering a man of power an opportunity to be humble, and a man born in the lineage of God to have his view broaden, to see God's obsessive and reckless love in a whole new way, to have a revelation of God's heart and his desire for the whole world. The way of Jesus revolution, the way of Jesus movement begins and continues through a simple meal of hospitality. Friends, I wonder what sacred visions God is waiting to give us here, locally, to each of us. I wonder what sacred visions God is waiting to give us. Perhaps the greatest revolution of hope is waiting for a meal. As my favorite public school teacher tells her food classes all the time, when you cook and share a meal, you are actively preventing the end of the world.